were ready to give up in southern Iraq. And hours went by, and somebody no doubt said, well, what are you going to do about these people with 8,000 to 10,000 troops down there? We've either got to move to get them, or they will become, if you will, a big refugee tide running in the face of our planned land invasion. That was a factor. Some oil wells, not necessarily the whole oil field in southern Iraq around Basra, was set aflame. And the U.S. forces have always said if Saddam Hussein did something like that, set the oil fields afire, they'd have to move. Then also today, early in the day, let us not forget that Saddam Hussein's forces launched at least 3 missile attacks in the direction of U.S. troops in Kuwait and perhaps toward Kuwait City. Certainly one, and we believe 2 of them were knocked out of the sky by Patriot missile defense systems. Another landed in the general area of some Marines but did no damage. So with all that in the mix, the decision was made, let's move on the ground. And that decision apparently was made sometime this morning, because while we weren't sure between 11 a.m. and about noon Eastern time that the ground war was starting, it's now very clear that the ground war is indeed fairly well underway. Fuad Ajami in Washington, you saw some of this videotape of Saddam Hussein. We don't know whether the appearance was videotape or live. Is it your judgment that was indeed Saddam Hussein?
Well, I have to confess I was teaching today, so I didn't really have a chance to see that.
Well, that's fair enough.
Yes.
We want to say, bring you up to date on Baghdad as you look at the picture here with that big cloud. What an ominous-looking cloud over Baghdad at the moment. U.S. cruise missiles hit the center of Baghdad. They shook the city with a series of explosions. There's no question from all the eyewitnesses, including our own David Chatham, we say our own, the Sky News reporter who's helping us in Baghdad, but all eyewitness testimony indicates that this was a heavier attack than the first one last night. Big plumes of smoke began rising from the vicinity of the Foreign Ministry and the Planning Ministry. At least one of Saddam's presidential palaces was also hit, and perhaps 2 of them were struck. The western bank of the Tigris River, the river in which Saddam Hussein sometimes fishes. He uses a hand line to fish. Pretty old-fashioned way of doing it, but just to give some texture to it, that he would sometimes go out of his palace, one of the palaces along the banks of the Tigris River, and fish for a little while. Well, the whole western bank of the Tigris River, which cuts through the capital city of Baghdad, is now enveloped in smoke. A number of government ministries, note, are located on the west bank of the Tigris. Now, to the east of the city, just to the east of Baghdad itself, were at least a couple of explosions in the vicinity of the Al-Rashid military base, not to be confused with the Al-Rashid Hotel, which is in downtown Baghdad. And that would indicate that the Republican Guard indeed was being targeted. And out of Washington, a government official confirmed that among the targets of this hit on Baghdad and the surrounding area, it was intended to hit some Republican Guard units. Keep in mind that the belief is those may be the elite Republican Guard units. This U.S. attack on Baghdad was much more intense than the previous strikes last night. And Reuters now has a witness, and they're quoting buildings on fire around the Planning Ministry in central Baghdad, and that's some of the flames that you saw on that earlier picture. Stephen Black, former arms inspector and now CBS News consultant. Why hit one of Saddam's Baghdad palaces, or maybe 2, when I would think that that'd be among the last places he would be?
I think you're exactly right. It probably is the last place he'd be, but that doesn't diminish the psychological value of people tomorrow morning in Baghdad waking up and seeing the burned out hulk of Saddam's palace, or even right now seeing flashes in the distance in the direction that every citizen of Baghdad knows that's where the palace is. That's the area you're afraid to drive by. If you have to drive by, you don't look out the window, you don't slow down. They all know what's over there and they're afraid of it. And if you can show them that that's been destroyed, it'll have a good, solid impact on their psychology and any continued fear of this regime they might have.
Interesting point, because for anyone who's been inside one of those palaces, it is almost impossible for a Westerner to imagine how elaborate, how expensively decorated they are. And they were hit during the 1991 war, and in the interim, they were rebuilt by Saddam Hussein. Not one palace, not two palaces, but a whole series of palaces. And so the symbolism of hitting those palaces, whether there's anybody in them or not, could become important, because, as you say, every person waking up in Baghdad with these great explosions would look in that direction, and what they would see is this immense covering of smoke and fire. The ground war is definitely underway. The Marines are now active on the ground in southern Iraq. The U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division, which appears to have been the first to cross the border, is active. So are the British troops. There is fierce combat believed to be underway, and you're watching continuing CBS News coverage.
American troops, including those from East Tennessee, in combat as Operation Iraqi Freedom unfolds. WVLT Volunteer TV News and CBS monitor events minute by minute around the world as fighting escalates. Stay here for information you need to know. Plus, rely on our experienced news team to examine steps officials in East Tennessee are taking to keep you and your family safe. WVLT Volunteer TV News, taking action for you.
Someday, we'll destroy deadly cancer without damaging delicate tissue using tomotherapy that locates tumors precisely and helps doctors plan and deliver treatment more effectively than ever before. Someday is today at Thompson Cancer Survival Center, the 2nd facility in the world with tomotherapy. Thompson Cancer Survival Center, leading to the cure.
Member of Covenant Health.
Aurora's Spring Preview Sale. We're celebrating with store-wide specials. Keep that summer look with your own tanning bed starting from $899. Or beat the rush and get that above-ground pool, something the whole family can enjoy this summer. Complete packages as low as $499. Reduce stress in your own hot tub with the area's largest selection featuring name brands like Jacuzzi, Sundance, and Viking. Pricing as low as $999. Aurora is located North Knoxville, I-75 North, exit 110, 2 rights to Aurora.
Hi everybody, Dick Vitale. Wow, the excitement's building for the event you've been waiting for, and it happens just once a year. You wouldn't want to miss it. Hey, this is madness.
It's Spring Madness at your local Ford dealer. Now get up to 0% for 60 months or take $2,500 cash back on Ford F-150 or Ranger. That's 0% or $2,500 cash back on the #1 selling F-150 or Ranger for a limited time.
It's Spring Madness, and it's awesome, baby. At your local Ford dealer.
Why do men climb mountains? Because they can. And now you can climb mountains like never before thanks to Arctic Cat's Down and Dirty Sales event. Prices are down, way down. Payments are down, interest rates are down. And your down payment isn't down, it's out. And during our special Down and Dirty Sales event, we'll throw in a worn winch valued at $399 for only $69. Get down to your Arctic Cat dealer and prepare to get dirty. Arctic Cat, more to go on.
This commercial is for everyone in Tennessee who does not have their car insurance with Direct. You need to call us right now. Direct can save you hundreds of dollars on your car insurance. Low payments, low down payments, payment plans made easier for you, and the absolute best in service. Tennessee, it's time you made the change to Direct with one simple phone call. 1-800-444-4211.
Save a lot of money when you buy Direct.
Miss Lewis. It is Miss, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Could you tell me again how you use 1-800-CALL-ATT for collect calls?
Well, I just dialed down the center.
With what, Miss Lewis? With what? You dialed down the center with 1-800-CALLATT. It's free for you, cheap for them. So good.
Are you sure this guy's a cop?
Save on every call. Dial 1-800-CALL-ATT for collect calls.
Family-centered care at Methodist can make a difference in your life. Whether you're having a baby in one of our sophisticated but home-like birthing suites, or undergoing advanced surgery to correct a life-threatening or embarrassing woman's health problem, or
American troops, including some from East Tennessee, in combat as Operation Iraqi Freedom unfolds. WBLT, Volunteer TV News, and CBS continue monitoring events by the minute around the world as fighting escalates. Stay here for information you need to know. Plus, rely on our experienced news team to examine steps officials in East Tennessee are taking to keep you and your family safe. Volunteer TV News, taking action for you.
Lines at this hour and this in from Washington, and it may confuse you. It certainly has confused us at least a bit. But officials who asked not to be identified are now cautioning that the troop movements and the fresh wave of night bombing and cruise missile strikes on Baghdad does not, I repeat, not represent a massive military attack, the one predicted and planned by Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. Baghdad has been attacked again, and parts of the city, just some parts of the city, are on fire. The second round of the U.S. cruise missile assault on the Iraqi capital began after nightfall with anti-aircraft fire, punctuated then by huge explosions, some of which you're seeing now on videotape. The Pentagon says the missiles were specifically targeted at Republican Guard barracks, among other places, with the other places we believe to be some of Saddam Hussein's palaces and some of the ministries. Listen and watch this for a minute. Cruise missile attack in Baghdad a short while ago. Now, well to the south of this, the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division is said to be engaged in ground combat with Iraqi troops just north of the border with Kuwait. And there's word that the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force has crossed the border into Iraq. And the British have sent some of their ground troops into Iraq. And then comes this word, I repeat it for emphasis now, that officials in Washington say, don't be misled, while the ground war has started, this, what you're seeing now, is not the main part of the invasion force. More about that later. As for Saddam Hussein, U.S. officials question whether it was he or a double who made a televised speech, either on tape or live, to Iraqis earlier today. This is, however, the tape you just saw was of Saddam Hussein speaking last night. Saddam Hussein, or somebody looking like him, has now appeared twice on Iraqi television, once today, once last night. There are reports of a second TV broadcast later today showing Saddam conducting a cabinet meeting. And so there have been two what are believed to be appearances by Saddam Hussein, but there is some question is undergoing analysis in Washington of whether it's actually Saddam. And Iraq is claiming to have shot down a U.S. helicopter. Scott Pelley reported on that before. He said a helicopter did go down. I believe it was unclear and left unconfirmed whether the helicopter had been shot down or crashed of its own accord, but no question that one U.S. helicopter went down in Iraq. At least some members of the crew are reported safe, and I believe that Scott Pelley reported that all of the members of that helicopter, whether it was knocked down or went down of its own accord, keep in mind there have been sandstorms, and sandstorms are hell on helicopters, so it may be a while before we know what the facts are in that. There is no official U.S. confirmation of that claim of shooting down the helicopter. Now, that's the situation, and let me quickly go to you, General. I'm a little confused. We have the Marines, the 3rd Infantry Division, and the British troops all crossing into southern Iraq, but this unidentified official says this is not the big ground invasion. What's going on here?
Well, the report that it quite possibly may not be the ground attack is a distinct possibility. What you may have found is 4 deployed Iraqi forces with their artillery and their missiles that earlier tried to target the Americans were a threat. And we then moved against them to push them back, to destroy their artillery, their missiles, or to push them beyond the distance where they could engage our forces.
For that purpose only?
Could be.
Not for the purpose of driving to Baghdad immediately?
That's correct. It could be.
Could be. So let us say that here's a case where the proverbial fog of war has descended to some degree.
Right.
Thank you, General. Now, for centuries, people have spoken of the fog of war, so I don't want to leave that. It's become a cliche. I'm reluctant to use it. But what it refers to is the confusion factor, which is always strong on the battlefield, particularly in the early going, correct?
Correct. And, you know, I mean, that's something that everybody has to deal with. The difference here, however, is our forces are very, very well trained. They have their mission. They understand their mission. They know what's required of them. They're competent. They're confident. They've got good leaders. They're able to adjust very quickly to changing situations. So although the plan may not be what initially was envisioned, our ability to rapidly change our plan, the flexibility and versatility of our force, enables us to do things that the Iraqis cannot begin to contend with.
Thank you, General. Strikes against Baghdad have been heavy today, in addition to the somewhat lighter strikes last night, in fact, considerably lighter last night. Richard Schlesinger, our CBS News correspondent, has a report on the weapons used.
Well, Dan, of course, we don't know exactly what weapons were used in this latest attack, but we do know that since the last Gulf War, the U.S. military has got weapons that are infinitely more accurate. I believe I heard General Kernan talking yesterday pleasantly about something called the JDAM. That is an attachment that fits on the back of a conventional bomb. It's a tail assembly that they just bolt on very simply onto the back of any old dumb bomb, as they call them. In that tail assembly is a satellite navigation system. And what that allows the military to do is pinpoint these targets with unprecedented accuracy. They believe that they can hit a target within 30 feet from 10 miles away and 25,000 feet up. Now you say we were able to do that in the first Gulf War with the laser-guided bombs, and you're right, we were. The problem with those was that in bad weather, sometimes the laser was reflected and the accuracy suffered. These satellite-guided JDAM bombs can be used in any kind of weather. They are incredibly accurate. The statistics are amazing. They say that one bomb can do the work of a dozen old bombs, that 2 airplanes filled with these bombs can do the work that 20 airplanes did with old bombs. So you can see this is an enormous advance in the military arsenal. You might want to think of it as sort of like the difference between attacking a target with a machine gun or attacking it with a sniper's rifle. So that's going to make a difference, the commanders believe. And when American commanders go to war, you know and I know, Dan, collateral damage, killing innocent people is something that is very much on their mind. With this ability to target things with this amount of specificity, with this accuracy, the hope is that that will reduce the collateral damages. Dan.
Richard Schlesinger, thanks. We, by nature, spend so much time talking about the weaponry and the equipment. It may be time to remind ourselves of what the late General George S. Patton said, and that is that wars are won not by weapons or equipment, that wars are won by men, and in the case of the modern Army, men and women in combat. And when we talk about the Marine Expeditionary Force and the U.S. Army 3rd Infantry Division and the British force going across the border into Iraq, now with the cautionary note that they may not proceed forward very far, may not. Maybe what they're trying to do is suppress what the Iraqi forces are there, and there may be a pause before continuing on with the great, put in quotation marks, land invasion. We simply don't know. But when we talk of these forces, remember that these forces are made up of thousands of 2 feet in 2 boots, walking the ground, hunkered down inside a Bradley fighting vehicle or inside a tank, that we just like to remind you from time to time that while we show you a lot of weaponry, and we sometimes show the results of what the weaponry does, for example, the Scott Pelley very good live reports all morning long of helicopter assaults and artillery fire, walking ahead of the infantry, preparing the way, that it's easy to fix in all this high technology. But in the end, wars are won by men and women on the ground, in the cockpit of aircraft, and at as many ships at sea supporting them. The Navy and the naval forces have gotten not quite as much attention as maybe some of the others. Let's go back to Scott Pelley right quick. Scott?
Dan, what we're observing here on the border seems to fit pretty well with what you were just hearing out of Washington, that perhaps this is not the main armored attack. We have an area here where we have a great deal of American armor and British armor. And if this was the main land invasion, I would have expected to hear and see tanks and armored personnel carriers sweeping by this position, and we don't see that right here. Now, one of the problems with battlefield coverage is you only know what you can see around you. No doubt there's a great deal going on in other locations, but given the amount of armor that was concentrated in this area, I would have expected to see a lot of tracks moving north from here, and at the moment we're not seeing that. What we are seeing is a great deal of artillery, and we have a little bit of videotape of an incident that occurred very near our position just a few moments ago. Hard to tell exactly what munition this was. Could have been a multiple launch rocket system. For some reason, the area that's immediately behind me, immediately across the Iraqi border, has been an area of interest. Dan?
Scott Pelley with videotape of the artillery attack, and Scott is reporting live from the Iraqi-Kuwaiti border. Now, inside Iraq, with the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division, CBS News correspondent Jim Axelrod. Jim, can you come up on your video phone?
We are still in Kuwait. Let me just set the scene for you a little bit. We are in our chemical suits as ordered by the military. It's about the 3rd of 6 stages of seriousness as far as preparation for any kind of attack. We are at a staging area. You can see behind me, using our night scope vision, any number of Bradley fighting vehicles and tanks and so forth. About, I'd say, 2 hours ago now, we witnessed a volley of artillery fire from the Paladin 155 howitzers. We have some videotape that we shot during this, and you can see the explosions. I believe, if I hear correctly, that was me on the phone at that point. I'm sure you could hear that. That's what it looked like in the skies over northern Kuwait just about 2 hours ago. As I say, we had a volley of fire from the Paladin 155 howitzers. Also, we saw the multiple launch rocket system fire. Instead of the multiple rockets at once, just one of the telephone pole size rockets, as we told you before, about 1,000 pounds of HE explosive in there. Dan, we should say, as I've been hearing some discussion about what might be going on regarding invasion, this point needs to be made, that the road needs to be prepared for the movement of troops. That needs to be done by American forces as well. So even before any large-scale invasion, the road needs to be prepared for any kind of troops, and that may be what's going on as well. Dan?
Jim Axelrod, first of all, and I want to say to our viewers, if you're scoring along with us, make that EA, which is Era Anchorman. We believe, Jim, that you were with those elements of the 3rd Army Infantry Division that had already crossed into Iraq, and I want to make it explicitly clear that where you are, you're still on the Kuwaiti side of the border. Having said that, Jim, can you shed any light on the somewhat confusing situation that the guidance, if you will, with no names attached out of Washington, is don't be misled by the moving of the Marines and the U.S. Army and even British troops into southern Iraq, that this isn't even yet the start of the, quote, big show, which is to say the main land invasion, which will be a race to the outskirts of Baghdad. What can you say about that?
Well, Dan, I think what you probably have here is some probing. In other words, it's really a twofold situation that we see. There is some probing into the opposition positions, the observation positions for Iraq. So the United States military wants to get a sense of just what kind of eyes are being kept on them. But much more importantly, as I mentioned a moment ago, there is a necessity for paving a way. In other words, a tremendous number of vehicles and tanks and Bradleys need to get through when the big show, as you call it, starts. To do that, there needs to be many lanes to make sure that there's a very free flow of traffic, an unencumbered flow into Iraq when that call finally comes. So what you may be seeing with the Army and the Marine forces that you're describing making their way into southern Iraq is the beginning of that paving process, pushing back whatever kind of resistance there may be, trying to identify that resistance, and then preparing the roads and the paths and busting through whatever berms and laying whatever bridges need to be laid over ditches, that sort of thing. A very necessary preamble to whatever is coming when the order is finally given for, as I've heard it called, the big show. Dan?
You're seeing live with the U.S. 3rd Infantry Army Division right on the border between Kuwait and Iraq, Jim Axelrod. Bulletin, the Kuwaiti news agency, which is usually reliable and dependable, says U.S.-led troops have taken the Iraqi border town of Qasr. Let me show you where that is on our map. It's down right on the border of Kuwait and Iraq. Now, Basra is the biggest port and the main port that gives Iraq access to the Persian Gulf. But this place, Qasr, is sort of right on this border here and also is a port, although it's a smaller port. We don't know who among the U.S. troops took that, whether it's Marine or Army, but a reasonably important development. Qasr falls in deep southern Iraq. We go back to Scott Pelley on the border, another location from where Jim Axelrod reported. Right now, first we go to Baghdad. New sirens have sounded in Baghdad, so we'll hold off on Pelley. Pelley's far south of here, hearing artillery fire as it continues to support U.S. ground troops operating in southern Iraq. For what purpose and for how long, we can't say. Let's listen to Baghdad. There were some sirens sounded. And we let you listen to that because it gives you a sense with that dark cloud from previous strikes today hanging over the city. If you're with your family in Baghdad, or if you're part of Saddam Hussein's apparatus, this is what you're seeing and that's what you're hearing. This is this night scope version of that scene. We can show you both night scope and straight away. Don't for the moment hear any more sirens wailing. Don't hear any anti-aircraft fire. We're going to hold on this picture for a bit, remind you that developments are coming thick and fast. U.S. troops have taken a small port in very southern Iraq, the border town of Qasr. Marines, U.S. infantry soldiers, and British soldiers are active in southern Iraq. A Washington source says it's not the beginning of the main force land invasion, which General Buchanan, the translation of which would mean what?
Well, to build on what Jim was just talking about, there's another distinct possibility here. If you recall earlier, we had a report of 3 missiles that were fired in the vicinity of friendly forces. And we had that report of those Iraqis in armored vehicles that the Marines engaged that could have been forward observers for the Iraqi forces. There's a force protection issue here that's got to be considered, and that is if your position has been identified and then possibly targeted by the enemy, you're going to reposition for your self-protection. So you're going to find an awful lot of movement about this battlefield as we continually posture to either attack or defend our troops.
So what's happening inside southern Iraq now with U.S. Marines, U.S. Army soldiers, and the British troops could, I want to put that in all caps, could be a repositioning of our forces forward inside Iraq while still awaiting the main push to drive to Baghdad.
Yeah, if they're in Iraq or Kuwait, wherever. But don't forget the artillery could also range into Kuwait, so they would be repositioning. I think once we get the word that the attack is out, you're going to find that this is going to be very ferocious. It's going to be very fast-moving. It's going to be a combined armed attack, I think, and we haven't seen that yet.
And we're looking now at a live picture in Baghdad. We heard some air raid sirens there not too long ago. David Trader of Sky TV is there standing by for his main employer, Sky TV, but we have his commentary available when and if something happens in Baghdad. Already what's happened there has been somewhat can only be described as big-time bombing of specific targets, including a couple of palaces, the foreign ministry, another ministry, and let's pick up a little David Chater just now, see what he's saying. David filed this report a short while ago after one of the airstrikes. So let's pick it up.
Even see to the right of the frame, behind that larger of the two fires, another fire, maybe two fires in the distance, just flickering away. The camera now is zooming into these fires, and I think we could be seeing several different fires. There have obviously been a number of targets, a cluster of targets within a relatively small space there. I would think it's difficult to tell, probably only a few hundred yards, maybe half a mile's distance between those various smoking, flaming and burning buildings there right in the heart of Baghdad.
David Chater with his commentary of a short while ago as parts of Baghdad began to burn. I remind you again, Baghdad is a huge city, 5 or 6 million people, and what we show you in the way of damage is confined to certain sections of the city. In this case, primarily, although not confined, to the west bank of the Tigris River, and then what is believed to have been an elite Republican Guard facility just outside of Baghdad was also hit. As we talk about this, we remind you again that U.S. ground forces, Marine and Army, are in southern Iraq, so are British ground troops, but it may be a kind of forward repositioning, partly to keep the Iraqis off balance, partly for what's called force protection, which literally means protection of the U.S. and British forces. So, you know, they'd been in static positions for some little while. Perhaps the idea was the Iraqis were beginning to zero in on them, so they just moved forward some. It's a reminder that battlefields are usually murky and chaotic, whether you're talking about Baghdad or the desert down in the south. Troops get lost, orders get bungled, bombs go astray, orders change. That's the nature of war in both its savagery and its confusion. Let's talk some about this port city of Qusar, which has just been taken. What do we know about that, Steve?
It's a small port on the Iraq-Kuwait border. It was actually where the Iraq-Kuwait monitoring organization that the UN had in place until just a few days ago. It's where they had their headquarters. It's neither here nor there land between Kuwait and Iraq, and it was controlled by the UN, essentially.
Basra being the big port down there, but this being one of the small ports.
Exactly. It's on the way up to Basra, but it has its own offloading facilities there and could be useful in that capacity.
General Konan, if you could pull back what we call on television the wide shot, what's the most important thing for people to know at this hour?
Well, I think right now that we are still setting conditions as to what we are going to do, and the timing of what we're going to do is going to be driven by the President and the Secretary of Defense and General Franks once those conditions have been met. We have not seen a massive ground assault yet. When we do, I think what you're going to see is they'll probably skirt Basra. They'll move very quickly to try to secure the oil fields and the crossing sites across the Tigris and Euphrates River to open up that axis of advance into Baghdad.
So we have seen ground assault in southern Iraq, but we have not yet seen the massive ground invasion that we've been talking about for months.
Yeah, it's just a caution here. I'm not sure we even saw a ground assault. We may have seen repositioning for force protection to get out of the way of, get away from where the Iraqi artillery could hit the U.S. forces or friendly forces. So it may be just a repositioning, just a caution on that.
Let's go to General Perry Smith if we can get him up very quickly. We don't have much time before the break, but General Smith, put in perspective for us today's attacks on Baghdad.
Well, it reminds me, Dan, of when I was a small child. I was on the way to Sunday school and watched the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. It's pretty scary for small kids. On the other hand, the families, I think, are protected. They're in their homes. They're not going after civilian targets. A very precise campaign, very much different from the campaign against Baghdad 12 years ago, where we went against bridges and a lot of targets. So you're going to see less bombing and much more precise bombing than we saw before. Notice the no-fly zone. I want to talk a little bit that doesn't apply anymore. But on the other hand, it is an area now that we have softened up and continue to soften up. So when the Army forces and the Marines start coming forward, much of this territory is going to be well covered, already softened up, and make it an easier run. So when they run toward Baghdad, in some ways it would be a lot easier than it would be coming in from the north, where the no-fly zone, as you notice, is much smaller, and there's a bigger gap between there and the time they come into Baghdad. And if we have time, I'd like to hit a couple of the airplanes that are involved, Dan, and stop me if I take too much time.
Don't worry, General, I will.
Thank you. I think it's good to look at this stealth fighter here very quickly to remind you that these are 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs. They're not GPS, they're laser-guided, and the airplane itself does the lasing.
Excuse me, General, GPS being?
GPS being global positioning satellites, which many of the bombs now are controlled by satellite all the way to the target.
I know you understand that a lot of people know that, but grandmother may not.
I understand. In the case of a laser now, the airplane has a laser in the airplane, points at a specific target, holds that laser on the target, releases the bomb, a 2,000-pound bomb, and the bomb goes all the way down to the target and hits the target where it's being lased by the aircraft. So the airplane does it all by himself. He doesn't have any support from global positioning satellites, but it's still very, very accurate. And of course, he can operate at night with impunity because it is a stealthy airplane. You notice the crazy formation of the airplane. It cannot be seen by radar at all.
General Perry Smith, thank you very much. An excellent summation of some of the weaponry being used. Now, Dateline Baghdad, Iraqi television indicates and seeks to indicate strongly that the Iraqi leadership, including Saddam Hussein, is still alive, well, and intact. However, the report has not been verified. There's frankly no way to verify it completely. A TV network owned, surprised, by Saddam Hussein's son, reports that the Iraqi leader, Saddam Hussein, met today with what are described his top aides and members of his cabinet. It's said, again, no way to confirm this, this included Vice President Taha Ramadan, the Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz, and the Foreign Minister. This Iraqi television report says, and I quote, that they met to review military and other measures to resist the aggression. Now, this report came just after Baghdad was hit, and hit harder today, again, than it was last night. Bulletin Iraqi radio says U.S. missiles hit Baghdad family home of Saddam Hussein. Again, there's no way to verify that as yet. But to repeat, Iraqi radio says U.S. missiles hit the Baghdad family home of Saddam Hussein. Baghdad radio said that there had not been any casualties. Again, no way to confirm that. We're going to go to videotape of this. These pictures are from Italian television. Different shot of the explosions in Baghdad, different view from the Italian TV. Let's watch and listen. Well, I don't believe they in fact have any natural sound on this. Now, this would be a shot from the eastern side of the Tigris River. If my time in Baghdad can refresh my memory quite enough, I believe that wherever this camera position was, it was on the eastern side of the Tigris River, and this is a picture taken on the western side of the river. I can't be certain of that.
I think it's the other way around. The fixed camera positions are on the Ministry of Information, and I think this is looking across the river at what was in the early 1990s the Ministry of Defense. It was on the this is actually on the what we're looking at is on the east side of the river, viewed from the west side. It's the old Ministry of Defense. It was bombed in 1998 and then rebuilt.
Well, let's get the picture back, and I believe I do stand corrected because now we have a somewhat wider shot if we can get that back up. But at any rate, it won't matter on what side of the river it is. It gave you and I do believe that it was on the eastern side of the Tigris River with the camera on the western side. It was just a different view of the attack we showed to you, and indeed you heard earlier on here on CBS News. Turkey has agreed to allow overflights of its territory, at least not yet agreeing to any ground forces put in there. U.S. Marines, U.S. Army troops, British ground forces are believed to be, are reported to be, not just believed to be, are reported to be in some kind of activity on the Iraqi side of the border. Cautionary note, this does not necessarily mean that the main force invasion has yet started. And you say, well, I heard some reports earlier. That's true. But this is a changing situation. I remind you again that frequently what you hear early on in situations such as this, particularly wars, what you hear first is sometimes wrong or not complete. What we do know is that ground forces are inside Iraq. This is CBS News coverage of America at War.